Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we are back for the latest episode of the soap opera that is Spurs. Listen, thank you so much for joining us. If it was for the very, very first time, where have you really truly been? We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms. We're of course on X, we're on Instagram, and we're on Blue Sky too. And we return, as I said, for the next chapter of the book that is ever being written of Spurs and where we are with regards to Ange Postecoglou, this current hierarchy, this squad, and more to come. We've got a wonderful special guest joining us. I can tell you what, whilst one relationship is floundering, one is blossoming, one is beaming. I'm delighted to have back alongside me the wonderful Sean over at the Spurs Talk Show. Shawnee, we're going strong, aren't we, at the moment, me and you?
We are. 100%, mate. It's been a beautiful blossoming friendship that has come out of adversity. Out of adversity comes opportunity, my man. And this is where I love you, buddy. I love you. It's good to see you.
Bless you, mate. You too. Never a dull moment in the story that is Tottenham. And I know many have seen these as actual therapy sessions at the moment. So take a seat in our therapy booth and we'll see what we can do. I know there's 15,000 of you that was here last night trying to understand where Spurs are at. And I'll be honest, 24 hours later, 48 for our listeners and audio, I'm still not quite sure if I've ever cracked where Spurs are at. I was very much clear in my mind that Ange Postecoglou was not going to be the manager for the Hoffenheim game. And all I keep being told is he will be the manager for the Hoffenheim game. Before we discuss that and more, I'd like to welcome back to Last Word on Spurs, a man that you hear his voice behind the scenes of all those pressers beforehand, the embargoes, after the game. Oh, God. Many would say, is he on a good job at the moment with regards to what Spurs are offering him? I've got the wonderful Tom Barclay back, also on YouTube as well. Tom, lovely to have you to return to Last Word on Spurs. How are you? And we'll get you to unmute when you're ready.
Hi, Ricky. Hi, Sean. Yeah, great to be back. It's a busy time at Tottenham right now, as you can imagine, as it always seems to be. But yeah, it's been ever fascinating every week, a new sort of chapter in this drama that is Spurs at the moment. Ange Postecoglou's Tottenham, but it never a dull moment. It always keeps me busy. But yeah, nice to be back.
Yeah, you too, mate. I say lovely to have you here. And like I say, I am very conscious that in between the weeks of Ange Postecoglou, you've now got us interrogating you and grilling you for the next hour. So we'll try and be as kind as we possibly can. All I would say to you, Tom, is that I think we've gone past the point of saying transfer window updates, given all Ange Postecoglou tells us nothing is imminent. So this will be a really fascinating chat as to what you are making with regards to Spurs right now, and someone that is very, very close to the Tottenham beat and has covered the club for many, many years. I suppose, Tom, to start with, can you believe you've got this amazing gig? Is it great covering Tottenham as a football club? I mean, absolute balmy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. I do love it. I mean, it's a privilege. It's a club that has so much interest worldwide. I mean, I obviously cover them for the Sun, and I'm very lucky to go to all these games along with the England games that I now cover as well. But I also, do the Tottenham Way podcast and this YouTube account, which is sort of growing this season, where I get a real feel for just that worldwide interest that I mentioned. A lot of Aussies, people from India and other parts of the world who are just passionate about Tottenham and love to hear about what's going on behind the scenes. Obviously, a lot of them quite worried right now, but it's as I said, never dull and always a privilege.
Tom, thank you so much. I will just say Melbourne are just waking up and they're joining us for the next edition of All Things Tottenham. So thank you so much. I will just at the top of this show a reminder, Tom has a fabulous YouTube channel that he's just got going, I think, over the last 6-7 months. Tom, am I right in saying that?
Yeah,
so
start of the season, very much.
What can they find on there, Tom?
Yeah, it's the handle is at Tom Barclay Journalist. Pretty self-explanatory there. I sort of dedicate it just to Tottenham rather than sort of messing with the algorithm by doing any England or other football stuff. And pretty much it's mainly post-match or post-press conference reaction. I generally do a sort of 10 to 20-minute video after each press conference that I go to a match. I don't go to every single one, but I go to most of them. And here and there, the odd sort of feature if something's worthy, where I just try to give a bit of a behind the scenes, I suppose, of what it's like to be in these press conferences and at these matches, and being lucky enough to be able to ask these questions, or have the responsibility, I suppose, particularly at the moment with asking Ange Postecoglou, why it's all going wrong at the moment, but also, throughout this time, various different questions. And, my thoughts behind what he says, what it means, what I think it means, performances, all that kind of stuff. So if you are as fascinated about Tottenham, presumably you are, if you're watching this, I hope you go and check it out.
Tom, thank you so much. And I will just give a reminder, the wonderful Shawnee over here at the Spurs Talk Show is giving you regular content throughout this January transfer window, despite, Shawnee, I'll let you come in on this point. Very little happening in this January transfer window, Shawnee, which I'm sure we're going to come on to in this show, because we are now well into 20 days. It'll be 21 for our listeners on audio. And we're at the junction where there's, at the moment, it feels no point of return with regards to this window. What are you making of it, Shawnee?
It's been so dry that another friend of the show, Johnny, and I have had to start a second channel that talks about things outside of Tottenham Hotspur called Football Week. So that's why that's my motivation. If there's nothing to talk about in Tottenham, let's go and find other things to talk about. And so it's not been great, has it, mate? It's worrying, and I feel like there's we are going to talk about it, but obviously it's a concern for me that. A guy that desperately needs some support, it doesn't seem like it's coming, at least in the way of, visual or audible transfer stories. But maybe that's because of Johan Langer's style, right? We've known him versus Paratici. Paratici likes to spin a lot of plates, and then the names were dropped through people like Tom, whereas I think Johan Langer likes to keep his cards closer to his chest. So I'm hoping that maybe the absence of noise does not mean absence of time invested, and hopefully some truth that we'll get those numbers that we hope to see by the end of next week.
Amen. Shawnee, thank you so much. Look, we'll just start off with regards to where we are on Ange Postecoglou's future, because it feels like this is a constantly moving story for some. And just to give listeners a bit of an insight as to how constantly moving it was, I think messaged Tom before the show was pre-planned for Monday and said, well, actually, Tom messaged me and said, as things stand, we are still on. But it was one of those where you just had to, well, for me, more than Tom, because Tom knows a lot more than I do, just to be very, very clear. I was thinking, is this going to happen? It's just been a crazy last 24 hours. But as things stand, Ange Postecoglou remains in place as the Tottenham Hotspur head coach. Let's give you a couple of different media updates. And then Shawnee's going to ask Tom as to what he understands is the latest in relation to Ange Postecoglou's future now. Different stories from obviously different outlets out there, and some wonderful journalists that have given us their views as to where we are. Alistair Gold, massive friend of the show, Ali. We hope Ali is getting some rest time during this period and has got enough time to keep training for that marathon of his. Ali reported earlier on the Monday morning that Tottenham remain intent on trying to help Ange Postecoglou rather than removing him from his position at the moment. And that was again earlier in that afternoon on the Monday, backed up by Matt Law from The Telegraph, who said Ange Postecoglou does retain the support of Tottenham chairman Daniel Levy and the club's board, but the head coach is facing an important week as he looks to fight the turnaround of his team's fortunes and also hold on to his job. There is currently no suggestion that Postecoglou's job is on the line, and Tottenham are not assessing his future on a game-by-game basis. But regardless whether or not it would place him under immediate pressure, the Leicester home game on Sunday is understood to be a must-win for Ange Postecoglou and his team. There have also been reports that former Borussia Dortmund head coach Edin Terzic, who, if you guys remember a few weeks ago, we brought you a report that he was linked with a potential interim role at the football club, would be one of the names discussed if Spurs were forced to make a change mid-season. But there is currently no signal that is about to happen. We've had a small smidgen of an update also come through in the last minute. So we've been on the show here from John Cross from the Mirror, who says Ange Postecoglou is under mounting pressure as Tottenham boss. Postecoglou's immediate future is understood to be secure, but he now faces a decisive week in the club season with two crucial games in the form of Hoffenheim and Leicester, as the club looks to remain on track in Europe and kickstart a revival in the league. So I'm going to hand over to Shawnee, who's going to get the latest from Tom, from what he understands to be where we are on the future of our Australian manager.
Yeah, Tom, just before I ask you the question, mate, I just want to kind of sort of layer it with it's odd to me as a Tottenham fan, and obviously following the club for close to 40 odd years. I don't think in the 25 years I've known Daniel Levy, I don't think I've ever seen him give this much rope, this much sort of sort of leeway, I guess, this much patience with a consistent dipping in form. And I'm wondering why. Like, not that I'm an advocate necessarily of any kind of change happening, but I'm just curious to know, A, what it is that you've heard, if anything, regarding his future. But more importantly, like, if you haven't heard much, if it's true that he does have the backing of the board for now, why is it that we decided to go and give Ange Postecoglou so much more wiggle room, I guess, with regards a downturn in output than we have done for the previous sort of 4 or 5 managers that we've had?
Yeah, well, that's a question that a lot of Spurs fans are asking themselves right now. I suppose to start off with, I have written something, which I hope the website I've put up by now, but it'll be in tomorrow's paper, that is pretty much similar to what the various reports from my esteemed colleagues, other papers that you just mentioned. My understanding is, there's still support from within at the club for Ange Postecoglou. He's safe for now. He obviously, I also wrote that he sort of faces quite a sort of crunch week because the Europa League is big in the way it's regarded within the club, because obviously if they go on to win it, which is still a possibility, it's a route back into the Champions League and obviously a trophy, but also Leicester at home is a good chance of arresting this horrible slide that they've been on, given how the fact that Leicester themselves have lost their straight 7 games. And I suppose, I don't think anyone really thinks Tottenham are going to get relegated, but whilst but I think it's fair to say the form at the moment is kind of relegation form. But if they go and beat Leicester at home, and bear in mind Ipswich play away at Liverpool at the weekend, so you presume that would be a defeat for Ipswich, given they just got thrashed 6-0 at home to Man City. The likelihood is then Spurs 11 points clear of the drop zone, and I think we can probably put what is not a fun story, but kind of people from the outside enjoying sort of having a laugh at Spurs, given how badly it's going. That kind of gets put to one side, and we kind of know what we already knew, really, that the league is kind of gone, but there's still lots of opportunities for cups this season. I have heard that. More just through speaking to agents around the game rather than anyone specific at the club. So it's pretty, very much sort of, this might not definitely be the case, but the feeling that I'm getting is that they want to at least give it to the Liverpool game. But I'm sort of loath to, obviously, because that's a crunch match with the Carabao Cup semi-final, chance of getting to a final. But obviously, if things go completely pear-shaped against Leicester and the scrutiny builds, I mean, as Ricky already mentioned, he was half expecting, particularly at half-time against Everton, to Ange to be out of a job after that performance, then, things could change. So I wouldn't want to put my sort of neck on line and say, oh, we've definitely got until then. But I do think they sort of view the upcoming fixtures as a chance for him to prove himself. And I suppose that's the key, is it feels like they want to give him the time to turn this around. They like him. They like what he's brought. Generally, he's liked by the players. Generally, my understanding is on that front, and that's a lot of the reasons why, I suppose. But I do think, as much as I personally like Ange as a neutral and as a journalist who's just looking for something interesting to write about, and he always gives, generally, at least in the pre-match press conferences, fascinating things to write about, I can totally understand why Tottenham fans, who are obviously despairing over an absolutely atrocious league season, will be slightly puzzling, or slightly as being an understatement, over Daniel Levy's support of him, given his sort of trigger-happy history.
Tom, I hope you don't mind me asking this. I know we've still got quite a lot to discuss on this show. Are you personally surprised, removing maybe the journalist hat for a second, that Ange Postecoglou is still the Spurs manager, when you know yourself, you look back at what previous managers have got in terms of time at Tottenham, and as we've said already, the fact that they, compared to Ange Postecoglou, when you look at, I think, the likes of Conte, Spurs were in third when Conte was sacked. Obviously, we understood what he said was going to be very hard for him to come back on from a, again, ownership perspective. Mourinho was 3 or 4 days before a cup final. Tottenham sacked him. I think Pochettino was, although Spurs were in 14th under Maurizio when they sacked him, they're only, I think, 3 or 4 points off still being able to get back into the top 10. And then obviously we know under Nuno that despite, definitely, 3 wins, but a rocky overall start to the season, that appointment just seemed doomed to failure from the start. I mean, are you surprised that Ange Postecoglou remained in post for as long as he has, given the league form. And that's despite, I must just say, a decimation of injuries where, you know, we've got an image here for watching audience here. You can see Spurs have currently got a full 11 of absentees from Vicario, you know, right through to Romero, Van der Ven, and Doggy, Basuma.
10 players.
But, yeah, almost. But I mean,
that's a good team. That's a really good team, that team.
I know. Can we play that one on Sunday?
Indeed. I mean, that's actually something that I neglected to mention. There is an understanding that he's completely hamstrung by injuries. I mean, there's a whole debate about injuries and where they keep coming from, I suppose. But they do understand that he's missing so many big hitters, and it never gets any better, does it? I mean, this weekend you start thinking, well, Richarlison's back, and then bang, Solanke goes. Johnson, it's a month for Johnson. I know Spurs fans are frustrated with his own performances right now, but you look at his goal return, he's important. That right wing position is important. So there's also, that's another thing that I should have mentioned, is that's my understanding of their part of their patience, is that when he's had a fully fit, it's not, is it fair to really judge him now, given he's got so many injuries? Although Ange himself, to be fair to him, I know he had that sort of outburst post-match. I forget which game it was, you know, in one of those, let's be honest, quite frequent, prickly post-match interviews broadcast about people not really, it was almost started saying, I'm going to stop answering his questions, because he was basically inferring that people weren't talking about, you know, how many injured players there were. But actually, I feel like since then, at least in the ones that I've been involved in, I remember my good friend George Sessions at a press association asking him about that, and Ange was like, look, people don't really want to hear me going on about this and using it as an excuse. He knows that even though it's totally valid, and I think it's totally unfair to remove that from the situation completely when you're analysing where they're at, people just get tired of hearing that. And let's be honest, there are other clubs, Bournemouth being a prime example, albeit they haven't had, as a lot of people pointed out to me on my YouTube account yesterday when I was making this point, they haven't had as many injuries in key areas for as long as Spurs have. But nonetheless, against Newcastle at the weekend, they were missing a whole bunch of players and managed to go and win that win at Newcastle, who'd won 9 on the bounce. I'm trying to think, what was your original question? Because I did have a point that I was going to go on to. But
my original question was, I mean, are you surprised that he's still in post, given the nature of results when you look at the at Tottenham?
Yes, that was, well, so first of all, when you're sort of living in this day to day of covering Spurs, where there's so many matches and so much traveling, like on Wednesday, I'm off to Hoffenheim, you know, and there's been a lot of that every other day. You sort of feel like you're slightly in the treadmill, and every so often you just have a look at the league table to remind yourself of how crazy it is that Spurs are in this position. And I suppose the answer is, to a certain extent, yes, when you look at, as I said, Daniel Levy's history. But for two things: one, you mentioned I've been covering the club for many years. It's only been about 3 years, so it's long enough now to get a real feel for this. But I've actually
dealt with by now, Tom, doesn't it? Feel now more.
but I've only actually dealt with one managerial departure, and that was, or permanent managerial departure, and that was Conte. And I mean, I actually wasn't in that infamous press conference. I was outside speaking to Oliver Skipp in the car park in a mix zone, or when he went off on the
short straw to report on that one. Sort of
one to miss. Yeah, I know.
Right?
And Eric Dyer as well at the time, But look, he basically talked himself into a sacking. That's what it felt like. So I do think, to a certain extent, you have to look at some of these on their merits. I don't know. No one seems to ever have really got the full story over what happened with Mourinho. There are various sort of theories over it. But Nuno, I know, and you referenced it absolutely right in the first place. They didn't seem to want him in the first place, and everyone knew it was the sort of 5th or 6th choice that Spurs eventually went down the road of getting when they couldn't get the people they really wanted. Very kind. And whether, you know, time has proven that to maybe be a bit short-sighted, given obviously how well Nuno's doing at the moment, but that was one they never really fully believed in, so that's why they did that one. And then Pochettino, I mean, again, this was kind of, I was sort of watching on as a football lover and a journalist, but I was mainly covering other teams at that point. It felt like maybe it was the end of a cycle there, even though, you know, all the question marks over why he wasn't back properly, blah blah blah. It's kind of going over old ground now, are totally valid, but I don't know. I don't know whether it's it equates, when you look at each of those individually, to presuming that they would definitely, at the first sign of trouble, cut the cord with their current manager. But I suppose the question wasn't so much the first sign of trouble, it's the fact that they've got to this stage where, let's be honest, no manager in recent history has. I do think the cup competitions are also absolutely key, because he could still win one. I mean, I don't know how Spurs fans are going to feel. I mean, you almost wish you could.
Yeah, I'll be honest.
You just can't see it happening. But like,
no, it's not like that. I mean, I haven't seen his team 15th in the Premier League. I'm sitting there thinking I'm more worried about getting involved in the relegation battle than I am in the League Cup.
Ricky, what's even worse though, mate, is if you do win, if you do beat Liverpool, if we beat Liverpool, and then we go on a couple of weeks, 3 weeks later, and beat Newcastle or Arsenal in the final, you can't sack Ange Postecoglou if he's the first manager to win a trophy since Juan de Ramos. And bearing in mind, Juan de Ramos the year after was 2 points from 8 games, and he got sacked and then brought in. I think it was Harry Redknapp that came in. But so people that are torn on Ange Postecoglou, but are also desperate to see Tottenham lift the trophy. Yeah. You know, where do your loyalties lie with regards to short-term gain but long-term pain if you don't rate Ange Postecoglou as a manager that can take us back to where we want to be in the league? And it's like you can't be on board sacking Ange Postecoglou if he lifts the trophy for us this year. In my opinion, I don't think that's fair.
It's interesting. I mean, Ange currently stands at a points per game average of 1.09. That sees him lower than Juan de Ramos, who obviously won a League Cup for Tottenham, and George Graham going back to 98, 99 and 1.25. So, look, I'll pretend Tom's not here for this conversation. You can always throw him overboard when you've got the bloody cup, surely. It's not out of the question. Not that I'd ever incite violence on a manager. But, you know, who knows what can happen on bus parades, right? And his Will Kurt. So, look, we're gonna hand over to Shawley to officially kickstart this episode of Last Word on Spurs. Like many episodes of Last Word on Spurs, that normally begin after about 20 minutes once we've warmed up. So, Shawley, I'll hand over to you to kick us off.
Well, Tom, there's no place to start other than Everton a couple of days ago, or yesterday, in fact, it was. It felt like it couldn't get much worse, and then it did. The first 45 minutes, 3-0 down. I think you have to go all the way back to Sligo Rovers for the last time Everton scored 3 goals, and that was in pre-season. But before then, you have to go back to 2023 when they beat Newcastle 3-0 at Goodison Park. A terrible first half performance. Obviously, we got back into it in the second half, finished the game 3-2. Maybe that kind of papered over some cracks in the, if you're looking at it from a sort of 10,000 foot perspective. But ultimately, it was a shambolic first half that kind of put us out of the picture. And look, Everton aren't exactly a team that are on rip-roaring form. I think it's their first home win over Spurs for against Spurs in 12 years. They failed to score in 5 of their last 7 games, but put 3 past us. 2 of those in 30 minutes. First time for them since February 2022. And all of that, Tom, it kind of culminates to a situation where we've got 1 point from our last 18 in the last 6 Premier League games. What was your overall takeaway of the match? And how do you feel? How do you feel about it generally? I guess is the best way of summarising.
Yeah, 1 point from 18 games. I mean, it is disastrous at the moment. The league form. I mean, Ange he obviously knows he can't try and sugarcoat any of this. He's talked about how unacceptable these run of results are and how very poor it is. But I have to say, I thought I wasn't at the match, but I did watch it on the TV, and I thought that first half was the worst of his reign by maybe a long way, to be honest, and probably one of the worst halves of football in Tottenham's recent history. You guys would be able to comment on that better than I can, but probably one of the worst halves since I've been covering the club. I felt for him to a certain extent, and I didn't feel for him. I suppose I felt for him because, hit by more injuries, Basuma and Johnson and Solanke. So, I mean, the way it's going, you can have a conversation about hamstring injuries, but Solanke, he twists his knee to having a shot on his own in training. I mean, what is that about? And so he's out, and he's obviously I think Solanke's been brilliant this season. His numbers might not be amazing, but for those of us, including all of you, both of you, and most people watching who watch Spurs regularly, I think his goal return is just part of his game, and he's been very good. Against Arsenal, actually, that was one of his. It wasn't so much he was poor. I thought Saliba and Gabriel did a job, but they are arguably the best centre back pairing in the league. But apart from that, he's generally, particularly in the last few months, been excellent. So to miss him was massive. But that doesn't mean that just because he had only in his mind 11 fit players, because Richarlison wasn't counted as ready to start the game, that he needed to switch up that formation. I know that fans have been, and we in the media have constantly been asking him about the possibility of adapting his style. I generally, at this point, having been in umpteen press conferences with him and seen the responses that generally gets, I've kind of sort of given up sort of asking about that particular question, because I just think he's so puritanical to the way he plays. And but then in this game, it wasn't so much him changing his approach in terms of passing the ball like he wants to, but he obviously had a tactical tweak, a formational tweak, by having this sort of hybrid back three system in the first half. And in his own words, it did not work, and it did not work at all. It really got exploited by an Everton side who've, as you pointed out, really struggled to score. Hadn't scored twice in the first half an hour since April 2022. Hadn't beaten Spurs at home in the league since David Moyes did it when he was last time he was in charge, back in 2012. And it really cost Tottenham. They just got overpowered, and players at the back got exploited to space. I think that was very, very evident in the second goal, where Ndiaye has basically the length of the half to run at Draggers in and goes past him and belts him in the top corner. It just felt like, for me, so David Moyes going into that game had replaced Ange as the oldest manager in the Premier League, and at 61 versus Ange being 59. But David Moyes has got an absolute wealth of Premier League experience, which, let's be honest, as experienced as Ange is in the way his own unorthodox route to the top, he doesn't have that. Moyes has had all kinds of experiences in the Premier League, from doing brilliantly with Everton, getting the Man United job. We know it didn't work out there, but he got it in the first place, which sums up how well he was doing. Getting relegated with Sunderland, so he knows what that is like and what failure feels like. West Ham winning the Europa Conference League. And it felt like going into that game, he used all those decades of Premier League experience to exploit the vulnerabilities that Tottenham had, whether it be starting a 6'6" centre back in Jake O'Brien at right back. And whilst they didn't score from a set piece, it was pretty obvious he was basically put in front of Kinski and caused them problems. Whether it be that long ball for the goal that because it should have been 5-0, not 3-0 at halftime. I guess maybe 5-1, because Son should have taken his chance. But that ball over the top from Branthwaite, which exposed that high line where Dominic Calvert-Lewin is running through. Okay, first touch, awful second touch, allowing Kinski to go back in. But that was so easy, so simple. And it felt like Moyes did a job on Ange going through a tough period. And that's where I have less sympathy for Postecoglou, because I felt like his system, which not only didn't work as a back three, but he kind of played into Moyes' hands at a time when, Everton have been really struggling for confidence in front of goal. They offered them the chance, and Everton grasped it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the thing is, Tom, there's been a massive deliberation over the last 24, 40 hours with regards to that system change, because there's been many Spurs fans, as you know, absolutely crying out for Ange Postecoglou to adapt. He then adapted in the first half. We get absolutely battered, and I think you're right in saying, it could have honestly been 4-5 or 6-0. I mean, that's honestly to get out, and that sounds mad. It sounds mad standing at Goodison Park against Everton saying, "I'll take 3-0 at half time." But that was honestly such an atrocious half, where we said this off it. There were so many traits to the Stellini Newcastle game with regards to how that was panning out, and it just was like, I've never seen Everton's side get so confident after wave and wave of an attack. It's the side that could not find the back of the net, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin, he was going for an absolute goal drought of not scoring for 16. But every Tottenham fan would have told you, stick a 10 on it, because every Spurs fan knew he was going to score. That system we spoke about there, I actually mentioned it. It did feel like there was traits of that Newcastle defeat under Stellini. And you know what? We know how bad things are. It's 1 point in the last 6 for Tottenham. If it wasn't for Kinski, as we said, it could have been a really high-scoring first half. But you know what? When we look at what we've taken in terms of points at the moment and how precarious the position is for Tottenham, we've only taken 5 out of a possible last 30. We've won 1 just of the last 10 Premier League games, losing 7. Only Leicester and Southampton have earned fewer points than the 5 taken by Spurs during that run. We've now also lost 12 games in the league this season. And since that win away at Man City, if you were to judge the table from then, Tottenham would actually be in the bottom 3 The result, as we know, does leave Tottenham 15th, which I still can't comprehend and believe I'm saying that about Tottenham. 15th in the Premier League. They are, as things stand, they are 14 points off the current top four. And the reason why I keep saying about the top four is not because I feel Tottenham are going to get the top four, but just to really emphasise just what you believe to be the club's target, just how far we're off that. And we are only 8 points off the relegation zone. I mean, it feels like a basic fundamental answer to this, Tom. It is really cups or bust now for Tottenham this season, isn't it? I mean, the league is pretty much it's a I would say a foregone conclusion, but what can Tottenham achieve for the league right now? I think their average points would see them, if they're lucky, finish 10th, 11th on the current run they're on.
Yeah, and you can't just pluck form out of nowhere as well. I mean, a lot of that is presuming that they suddenly click into gear when they get their players back. First of all, the way it's been going with Spurs, it'll probably be that some players come back and then a few more will get injured, just because that's how it's been going, unfortunately. But I think, the league is gone. The only question is making sure they don't somehow get dragged into a relegation battle, which I don't think they will. And I think Leicester at home is a perfect opportunity, as I outlined before. If they win that, likelihood is they'll go 11 points clear of that, and that'll be fine. But Ange was asked, I'm trying to remember which game it was, because there's been so many recently. It was a home game probably about a month ago by Matt Law at the Telegraph in the press conference afterwards, about whether there was still he still felt there was enough to fight for in the league, given that the way it had been going. And back then he was like, I still feel that it's very congested. I feel that we are capable of putting a run together when we have our players back. But I think that ship has kind of sailed now, because back then there was probably like a sort of 4 or 5 point gap between, about 8 teams right in the middle of the league. But now, as you can see from that graphic, they're so far off it. And the teams above are way more consistent. And think of a team like Aston Villa, who already, 8 points ahead? 8 points ahead, 12 points ahead. They haven't even hit their stride at times this season. So, the league is a write-off. It's about making sure they're safe, but the cups are still there. And whilst you might all have massive skepticism over whether they really can go to Anfield and turn it around against an imperious-looking Liverpool side, they do have a 1-goal advantage. It's about as good as you probably could have hoped for, given they'd been battered 6-3 at home 17 days before that game. They'll have a few more key players back by then, and Liverpool might have their minds on other matches and other priorities at that point. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but it's a big ask. There's no denying that.
Tom, just quickly as a follow-up on the back three tactical pivot. It's interesting. Ricky alluded to this idea that all the fans have been saying just do something different, and I've been an advocate of the same. But I have noticed in the last few games, Newcastle, Liverpool, etc., that we haven't necessarily changed the shape of the team, but we have changed. The heat maps have suggested our fullbacks have overlapped more and a bit more balanced. We've gone longer with from the goalkeeper to relieve some of the pressure of doing that silly little pass in the back, between the centre back and the goalkeeper. But against Everton, he went to a back three, a tactical pivot that a lot of Tottenham fans that I speak to have been saying that the system would suit, the squad would suit if you had everyone fit. The fact that we tried it once for one half of a game and it didn't work, and Ange said it didn't work, and everyone's now saying it's crazy. Is it too short of a sample size to write it off as a tactic, given that a lot of managers have enough time on the training ground to practice a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. They also seem to find time for the SWOT analysis of whoever you're playing against next, where's their weaknesses. And yet Ange has always said that the message, delivering that message, embedding the philosophy is more important than anything else for 20 months. That message clearly hasn't landed strongly enough. But now he's pivoted and it didn't work for 45 minutes. But is that because there hasn't been enough time to allow that particular message to actually kind of to filter through to the players? And are we going to be guilty maybe of trying something once to get it out of the way, to say, well, we tried it didn't work, let's go back to plan A, whereas maybe there is some merit to actually spending more time developing the back three model. It just didn't work then, but it might work if there's more time that's allowed on the training ground towards it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'm not going to pretend to be like some absolute tactical mastermind when it comes to, particularly with journalism. I like the sort of human interest kind of side of things. And you probably noticed that from, if you listen to my questions, they're often less about, tactical sort of positioning and stuff. But I'm not, not an idiot as well. And I do love so I can have my own opinions on it as well. And I will say that when speaking to sort of people behind, within the game, about Ange, whilst there can be a lot of praise about him, the one thing that does often come up is this lack of adaptation or willingness to try something different. And it had been mentioned over a long time about maybe a back three might be something that you don't try all the time, but maybe you could try from time to time. And I still believe, personally, when you look at the way the squad is built, when it is fit, which is absolutely the crucial asterisk to that question, you already said it yourself, Udogie, Porro, they're already probably naturally more wing backs anyway, or certainly have played there before, and Dragusin, Van der Ven and Romero, you think would fit into a back three. So when they had that team available, you could make a case for that being a possibility, and not that it'll be painful to hear, I suppose, from a Spurs fan point of view, but to look at Nuno and what he's doing at Forest, he quite regularly towards the end of games switches to a back three to sort of see them out. And I do feel like, personally, one of the legitimate criticisms of Ange Postecoglou is in-game tactical sort of switching or lack of it is a fair thing to sort of pinpoint as where he could maybe change it up a bit. But when it came to the Everton game, I agree with you about Stellini and Newcastle. That's one of the things that came to my mind, was when going into the Stellini period after Antonio had left, all the fans were, ironically now, given that anyone who's calling for a back three now, it was no more back three. Let's give a back four a chance, and that was a constant sort of criticism of Conte and a sort of a cry for some of the fans to see something different. But obviously not in that game. And then he goes and does it with Perisic at left back, and he does it with Porro, who, to be fair, since then under Ange has sort of proved himself generally to be solid at right back. But back then, the idea of him playing right back would have filled every Spurs fan with dread, and so it proved in that particular game. And there was sort of a similarity there with Everton: is why try this here? If you're going to try it, don't try it particularly there. But Ange's own reasoning behind it is he felt like he only had, as I said, 11 players fit, and this is the way he wanted to fit them all in. I think you can sort of point to and say maybe Archie Gray could have played midfield, you could have started Davis and Dragusin as centre backs, so it's fair. I think the only other thing to add to that is I also agree, as I would make the point, for any manager at any level, you need time to implement major tactical tweaks, and they clearly did. They had barely any time to bring that in. It almost felt like quite a late late sort of decision based on players being unavailable. So it's perhaps not a surprise that those players struggled to adapt to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you chuck it out completely going forward.
Yeah. I think it was quite interesting before Shawnee jumps back in there. Jason McGovern, obviously a big part of Last Word on Spurs. Me and Jason having this discussion, I think only on, yesterday, Sunday evening, that, we've seen Ruben Amorim really nail down the fact, Tom, that, or almost double down the fact, I am not going to change. This is the way I play. These are my principles. And I will live and die by my methods. And I think the feeling is, even with Ange, because he's been so, many will use the word stubborn or hell-bent in regards to the way he wants to play, that the minute you decide to change, the dressing room already have that feeling he's losing them. Does that make sense? Because if you're deviating away from what has made you successful, I feel that's why Ruben Amorim has been so very much saying, I will take the hits in terms of our position in the league and stick by the way I want to play, despite there being calls to change. Can you understand that angle of where I'm coming from on that point?
Yeah, I do, and I do feel like he's sort of backed. A lot of these managers seem to back themselves into corners by being so puritanical over their approach, and it does lead to the kind of or question marks when they do switch it, particularly in a sort of shock last minute switch, like perhaps that happened this weekend, to wonder whether it might have that effect that you're talking about. But it's something that actually bothers me about modern day managers. I find it really almost. And this isn't a dig at Ange specifically. It's from Vincent Kompany at Burnley to Russell Martin at Southampton to Ange to a certain extent to Ruben Amorim at the moment. Like, it seems almost a bit egotistical at times to be like, we only play this one way. I think for me, this is just a personal opinion. The art of really great management is adapting and realizing that you're up against amazing competitors who have their own thoughts over how they're going to go about it. And if you are so wedded to one way or style of playing, it can, when teams work it out, that will leave you to certain sort of criticism. And, you think of like Southampton or Burnley, for example. Yeah, Company walked into the Bayern job because everyone could see, like, when it works, it's brilliant, and maybe with better players, it might work. But where are Burnley now? I mean, yeah, they might get promoted again. It just feels like I always go back to, I used to cover the Football League long before I covered Tottenham. My first season of doing that regularly, and I used to cover the Championship a lot of the time, was the season that Bournemouth won promotion from the Championship under Eddie Howe, and I covered them a lot that season. And I remember the midfield they had, and you guys might have forgotten some of these players, but they had Matt Ritchie on the right wing, they had Andrew Sermon, they had Harry Arter in the middle, and they had Mark Pugh on the left, and they bossed teams. They had Jan Kermigan up front with Callum Wilson, who obviously went on to be an England player, but they were brilliant. The football was wonderful to watch. They got promoted to the Premier League, winning the league, and Eddie went, there's no way I can play like this with this current crop of players. He switched it up. He played counter-attacking football. Ryan Fraser, who was at the club during that season but barely played, suddenly became a big part of the team because he realised it wasn't going to work. And I just feel sometimes with some managers, as much as Ange sort of says, well, if you throw away your principles, then what are you left with? I don't know. For me, the art of being a really good manager is being a little bit able to roll with the punches to a certain extent. But yeah, just finally on this point, I do think it is interesting that it does feel like he's switched it up a little bit in the last few games, not just Everton, but Arsenal. Even though afterwards he basically hammered the performance by saying we were too passive and it wasn't us. And I like to see us be aggressive both in and out of possession. We were talking about it in the office today, actually, with one of my, in fact, you probably know him, Dean Scoggins, who's my sort of deputy boss at the Sun, who's a big Spurs fan, and I think might have been on the show before. And he was noticing in that game that Spurs backline were quite deep compared to how they often are. Obviously, Arsenal dominated the ball and pinned Spurs back, but his observation wasn't that it was just a dominant Arsenal performance. It was and just a Spurs passive performance, but it must have been something from the manager to sort of let them come on to Spurs a bit more than they normally would do. Now, Ange's comments after would probably suggest that wasn't the case, but if it were, and definitely at Everton, there do seem to be a few changes of late from a manager who's been so, as I said, puritanical to his one way, that whether that's right or wrong, given that everyone's been calling for a change, so it seems a bit rich to sort of criticize him completely for it, but it is interesting, I'd say.
Yeah, Tom, I 100% concur with you. I think that unpredictability is like the second best ability. I think obviously availability is probably the top one, but going into doing the same thing all the time, it might be nice for your brand as a manager, but it ultimately isn't always the best way to get the most important thing, which is 3 points for the team. But obviously, look, his system, his plan A, whether or not the plan B pivot to a back three was forced through because of a tactical pivot that was by design, or whether it was forced by injuries, we have seen it. I just hope that it's not necessarily written off as a failure with only 45 minutes of evidence to back it up, because I agree with you again, it's maybe the wrong team to try it against, but I don't necessarily think it has to be chalked off as a failure immediately. What I would say, obviously, is that injuries are part of that conversation, Tom. And with that in mind, just looking at that, the team sheet, what was on the bench for the game, I think Solanke's absence took our number of absentees up to 10 at the moment. Postecoglou only had 4 regular starters left on the lineup. I think he had 6 18-year-olds. His bench against Everton, other than Richie and Reguilon, had 6 teenagers. One of which was 16 and 2 were 17. Plus, of course, you have Min-hyuk, who's only 18, hasn't played any minutes yet. I mean, it's difficult to form and to put out a decent team for Ange right now. How much of a relevant factor? I know we spoke about this earlier, but in terms of where the rubber meets the road, is it an explanation or is it an excuse? The fact that there is just so many injuries and that these smoother waters that he's always talking about that will be around the corner, they never seem to come. And as you said after the game, there's more injuries to add to that list now with Brennan Johnson. How much of a justification for where we sit in the league do you think that the injuries plays on that kind of in the debate?
Massive, absolutely massive. And any Spurs fans who sort of try to brush that under the carpet deny not being fair. I think they will point with some justification to the Newcastle loss, the 2-1 I'm talking about earlier this season, the draw at Leicester when Spurs pretty much had most of their first team players fit. So I'm not saying it's the only reason they are where they are, but if I remember those games rightly, and I was at Leicester, I didn't go to the Newcastle game, but I was at Leicester, and like Spurs battered Leicester. I mean, they should have been 4-0 up at half time. They're just wasteful finishing. And then, to be honest, they were lucky not to lose it because Leicester turned it around. But at that and Newcastle, they were very good. They just got, to be honest, they got completely exploited in that vulnerable area, which is, I think, is a fair criticism. You know, high line, Van der Ven got roasted, to be honest, by Isak, who's a brilliant striker, to be fair. And Newcastle weighs hard for any team, apart from Bournemouth, it seems. You know, that's when the performances were good, the results weren't so. The thing now that they've been decimated by injuries and having to rely on young players who clearly got great potential, but the very nature of young players is they are inconsistent. That's pretty much, there is no young player in the world really that won't have sort of up and down games, means that those performances are have dipped. It's not just the results. Obviously, the results have as well completely, but the performances have too. And it's not solely like that. And it's not solely down to that, but it's a crucial factor. And where I think, so I have massive sympathy for him on that front. Where it's fair to be critical is, and it comes back to my adaptation point that I just made about where what really makes a top manager to a certain extent is where he could have made an adaptation. You don't go into, when you had Vicario, cruelly injured in a freak injury, and you have Fraser Forster coming in. I watched most of those games. I was at most of those games, and whilst he made some good saves, he was not comfortable with his feet. I guess they kind of got away with it, and that was kind of Ange's point a lot of the time, is that it's risk and reward and it's worth it, and these things don't happen very often. And actually, the game where it really cropped up was Man United. And they won that, didn't they? Obviously, but it was you could sense the nervousness around the back four. And one thing about Kinski, even though he's had his own a couple of heart and mouth moments, he doesn't lack for confidence on the ball. And I can sense, at least from the games that I've been at, and from watching Everton the other day on the TV, I still think there's a confidence from the back four of having him in goal because of his ability with his feet. So my point is that when he was without the ability, a keeper who was able to do that, he didn't change it, and he was stubborn. He stuck with it, and I think that's where I fear that might, when we look back, if he does go over the next few months, that will be a crucial factor in a time where if he switched it a bit. It doesn't mean throw out all your principles and lump it up and go Sam Allardyce football. It means just have little tweaks here and there where it could end up costing him. And that's what makes me sort of, it's a bit depressing really when you sort of so invested in it. I'm not a fan, but you're invested in the whole situation. You think, I just feel that was a mistake.
What's interesting, Tom, look, time is really moving of the essence with us here. There's so much I want to talk to you about, but I got to say, there's about over 6,000 that are watching the show live. So thank you so much, guys, for all your incredible support for the show. I think that everybody knows Ange Postecoglou has clearly got his faults, right? There's no doubt about that. But there is a growing feeling amongst the fan base, Tom, that the problem stretches far beyond him. And we're at a situation now where the feeling around ENIC and for Daniel Levy is for many getting to the point where his position does feel untenable. And here we are, once again, 18, 19 months, which looks like this cycle could be coming to an end. And here we are questioning whether another manager is on the verge of losing his jobs, where it's the same reports. We don't expect when I say it to you guys, it's like, it already feels like that. You're getting these reports coming out, the dreaded vote of confidence, the fact he's got a week to save his job. I mean, you've been covering the club for 3 years, like you say. I think that's a fair gauge to have an idea of what you've made of this current hierarchy. I mean, what have you made of ENIC at the moment? Because it does feel for a lot of fans out there that they're as disinterested in ever when it comes to the actual on-pitch success. And whilst they're doing some great things behind the scenes in terms of the Formula One, the boxing, the NFL, in terms of the generation of funds, for a lot of fans, they feel they're not seeing that being actually put back into the squad. And here we are 20 days into a transfer window. Ange Postecoglou, the common rhetoric throughout this window and before it was open is that Dominic Solanke needs help. These players need help. And that help doesn't appear to be forthcoming anytime soon. So what's your gauge on it, Tom, for you?
Yeah, I mean, your question or your sort of statement really of whether is it Daniel Levy's role is untenable.
Well, Daniel Levy,
ENIC.
I mean, I think Daniel Levy and ENIC's position at the moment for many fans out there will feel, untenable given the lack of support this manager has had. And there'll be many out there that feel when you go back over the years of different managers at different times, they've also not been given the adequate support to be able to do their job. And I actually said last night for me, I know we'll come on to maybe potential other, managers for Tottenham in the future. I look at the job now Tottenham have as a brief, and I just feel the limitations that are put on a Tottenham manager. I just find it very hard for anybody to succeed here, given the limited funds that you're getting to make the most out of it. I mean, you could argue the man that really got, the best out of Tottenham was Mauricio Pochettino. He did that with all due respect, one hand tied behind his back, and also getting the absolute most out of a lot of the players he managed during his tenureship here, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the reason I asked you to be specific is I don't really know what untenable when it comes to an owner means, because it's not like he can get sacked. Like it's kind of up to them whether they sell the club or not. I mean, I agree. I see where you're coming from with all your criticisms, and I think there's a lot of them are very legitimate. I don't, as a sort of neutral and impartial person looking in on this, I don't really see how, unless someone buys the club or he takes a step back, anything changes on that front. So I think until that day occurs, we're going to be stuck in this loop where unless a trophy or some success comes along where people change their opinions on Daniel Levy specifically, we're just going to keep coming back to this when it starts going pear-shaped. I've been at the games, and particularly that Kulusevski chant recently, and he gets the flack, and I'm not saying any of it's wrong. It's just kind of where we're at. We seem to be in this kind of Groundhog Day situation with Tottenham, and it's been quite regular since I've been covering it, particularly in those sort of final days of Conte, particularly after he went. And I definitely see where Spurs frustrations lie. I mean, the lack of trophies is obvious. This window, I think you can definitely point to when it feels like Postecoglou needs help, as he said, and that's about as far as he's going to go. It's funny, I've had a few people say, like, why doesn't Ange just sort of call the board out more? And it's like, well, I think that will definitely get him sacked, to be honest, if he does that. I mean, I think I was in those press conferences with Antonio Conte, given some of the messaging he was putting out there, not just the obviously the final one, which made his position untenable, but the sort of messaging that he had throughout. I don't think that would go down well generally, and so I don't think Postecoglou, given the situation he's in and the kind of borrowed time that some people might think he's on, your question, Sean, earlier about being surprised that he's had as long as he has had, don't think turning on the board publicly I definitely don't think that would help his situation. No. So that's why he doesn't do that. I think go on.
Just to come back in there for 1 second, Tom, I think the frustration that a lot of fans will have with regards to Ange is that whilst the position in the league isn't great, I think there's been a couple of occasions where recently he's come out and said, it's okay, we're going to work with what we've got. And I think, look, I'm not suggesting to go down the full route that Conte went with regards to completely setting the ball alight, but it doesn't appear that he puts any kind of pressure on the board when he's got the opportunity to do so in an interview and just keep saying we're working what we've got. Where, I understand what you're saying, that he's an employee of the football club, and he's obviously, having to then be obviously, with all due respect, answering back to the board. Tottenham's position isn't great right now, but you can clearly see he needs help. He's made that clear on a number of occasions. And I just think, how are we 21 days going into a transfer window, and all we've brought in is a goalkeeper that, with all due respect, that should have been done in the summer, that they moved forward to January, where you can clearly see the team needs help. And it just feels we're coming to a point now where Tottenham are going to get these players back. We're going to come on to it in a second. I think it was, I think, quote me, friend of the show, Alistair Gold said it. We lost Romero van der Ven, was it the 8th of December? We lost Ben Davies 3 days later. They had nearly a month to prepare in terms of what Tottenham need. And here we are with no real ambition to try and help the manager try and arrest the league form and also help him when it comes to the cup competitions, because that is what we've got really left to play with here, Tom.
Yeah, so what the point I was going to go on to make is during my time at the club, not at the club, covering the club, the transfer windows that I've experienced, there have been quite a few where I think the managers have been backed comparatively to other managers at other clubs in a not particularly. I don't think they've been that. I do think they've had more support than some, put it that way. But obviously, we're going through, a lot of it comes off the back of a lack of support, particularly for Poch during the period when a lot of fans felt, probably rightly so, and I know that they were paying for the stadium, but that's when they really should have cashed in, when they had some of these top players right at the peak of their game. So that comes into it, and obviously there's the sort of desperation for a trophy, understandably. So there's all this pressure that comes on as well. But I would say, the summer when they signed Richarlison, for example, they actually bought quite a few players. I just feel like I'm looking back with the wrong players. I've made this comparison a few times. The summer Richarlison signed for Tottenham was the same summer that Newcastle bought Alexander Isak. So there was obviously an opportunity there, and it's about which players you sign. I don't know whether you could specifically put that down to Daniel Levy. Maybe you can. He obviously is the man who says yes or no. It's who he listens to. But where I do think criticism of his of support is definitely fair in my mind, is this window so far, and probably the last window. Even though they spent 65 million on Dominic Solanke, which was the highest amount of fee paid by any Premier League team for a player, an incoming player. So I don't think you can sort of say he wasn't backed at all. But they went for young players. They mainly went for young players, and I think they were left short at a left back, at least cover there, or someone to challenge a doggy. I think that's been proven by his performances this season, and the fact he's got his injury situation. They needed more cover there. I think Timo Werner's re-loan has proved to be a flop. To be honest, it was a bad decision. I think on the balance of things, bringing him on loan last season, and you look at what he produced, wasn't a terrible signing last year. He actually contributed. It might not have been the most inspiring signing. I know Spurs fans aren't a huge fan, and they weren't a huge fan when he was brought in last year, but he did help to a certain extent last year. I don't think that's really been the case beyond that sort of Carabao Cup Man City game where he scored. And that was a position where, as I said in the summer, when they were thinking about either signing him permanently or reloaning him, it's like what else you could have got instead. And that's where I was wondering about that. You mentioned goalkeeper, they could have brought someone in then, but it was the fact that they relied so heavily on young players who do look really exciting. And I do think Wilson Odegaard's injury is forgotten about. He's the forgotten man, isn't he, this season, because it was such a long time he got injured. But the fact that he got put straight into the first 11 pretty much after signing shows you how highly Postecoglou rated him, and then probably a reason why they signed Werner on loan rather than buying someone else, because they put a lot of stock in him. So that's clearly cost them. But I felt at the time there was a couple of positions and maybe a bit more experience that was needed. It's obviously easy to say it in hindsight, and it wasn't like they didn't. The amount of money that was spent was nothing, but maybe that was an issue. And then this month so far, when he desperately needs a bit of help, that is also a fair criticism, even if the window is. I know fans hate hearing it, but speaking to agents at the moment, there's just so little. A lot little going on, although that won't wash when you see Man City spending the money they are, I suppose.
Yeah, Tom, just on that, as someone, I always try to be as balanced as I can with my analysis of Daniel Levy, and people sort of chastise me for it, I guess sometimes, but I would make the argument that we do spend a lot of money most windows, and we just don't necessarily always spend it in the right place. And when you're trying to put together you're trying to sort of make the very difficult job of squaring a circle whereby you're pivoting towards a youth-centric approach towards your transfer policy, but also trying to make those leaps and gains and trying to compete with the guys at the top who have that ability to draw in the players based on their trophy success in the past. It's a very difficult job to do. And that notwithstanding, I think the absence of any support for Ange right now is difficult for anyone to get their head around. And I said to you in the room backstage, like I feel like I'm questioning not necessarily just why not, but if there is a justification as to why, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense alongside things that are happening in the back room with the ownership investing money, with the Staveley deal, the £500 million. We're not sure what's happening with that. And the fact that he hasn't been backed right now, alongside the sort of dip in form, obviously there's rumours around, we've spoken about this, ad nauseum, I guess, over the last few weeks around whether or not Ange is safe in his job. And when you look to alternatives, is one of the reasons why potentially he hasn't necessarily been sacked yet, outside of the fact that Daniel Levy wants it to work and that there is a sort of a desire for it to be a process that we're going to get through the tough times. When you look at the other options, people like Iriola at Bournemouth are obviously mentioned all the time. People like Thomas Frank, Marco Silva, most of those managers have the benefit that Tottenham doesn't, or that Ange Postecoglou doesn't, in that they don't have to play as many games this season. I think Tottenham are going to play probably as many games, or have played more games this season than any other right now, given all the injuries as well. If there was a situation where something was to change, do you have any kind of insights into who there might be, who might be on the kind of on the list of the shortlist next? Would it be Iriola? Would he be a good fit for Tottenham, and Thomas Frank and Marcus, and anyone else, like maybe Terzic as well? We spoke about earlier briefly.
Yeah, I'm sort of loath to speak too much about potential successes while Ange is still in a job, but I guess that's the name of the business to a certain extent, and I do think those all three would kind of come under consideration. Iriola's obviously done a terrific job at Bournemouth. Sort of had a difficult start taking over in a controversial situation when Gary O'Neill got sacked, where people thought that was a bit of a surprise given how well he'd done. I think he was winless in his first sort of 8 or 9 games, but since then he's gone from strength to strength. He's really adapted the team, improved the team. He's improved players, which is often a sign of a really good manager. Their recruitment's been spot on, hasn't it? Talking about recruitment, talking about Isak at Newcastle versus Richarlison at Tottenham. Obviously, Richarlison's injury has been the killer for him, so maybe it's harsh to pin it in that way. But you look at someone like Kirkez, that was really smart business. It looks a really top player who I wouldn't be surprised if he went on to the next level. And obviously, Solanke got signed for Spurs, having reinvigorated himself at Bournemouth and specifically under Iriola last season. So with the way he plays, he'd be a really good fit. But again, I don't want to be talking him up too much as a successor, because
we can get that. It's someone in post. It's somebody in post there. We understand. It's someone in post. It's obviously a tricky conversation when Ange is still the manager.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I'll come back to what we were saying earlier. Like, say, I know, yourself, Ricky. I think you're going sort of publicly about having doubts, at the least, about Ange and lots
That's
of.
fair.
I get all the messages and I see all the tweets and everything like that. And one thing I'd say is being in the game at the games. I can't think of many occasions where the crowd have really turned on Ange.
Yeah, it hasn't got toxic.
Yeah,
it hasn't got toxic.
Yeah. The only time I can think of was Bournemouth away against Iriola's Bournemouth, but I don't think that was specifically about the performance or wanting Ange out. It's because he didn't go over to sort of or near enough to the fans to sort of to applaud them for their the support, I suppose, which is kind of what we saw in those kind of ugly scenes really at the end, although kind of understandable at Everton. I'm not really a fan of the abuse that seemed to be going towards Son's way, even if he's going through a really rough patch given what he's given for the club. But these are the fans that spend their hard-working money going home and away, so I'm not going to hammer him too much. But anyway, if further down the line, then all three of those names have been sort of in the frame previously. They've obviously done great jobs, and I suppose with Iriola, there's sort of Poch vibes given what he did on the South Coast as well, but albeit with Southampton. But as I reiterate, from the first question and the first bit that we talked about, Ange still remains safe for now, and they want to give him the chance to prove he's the right man, whether you think he is or not after what you've seen. That is the situation. It's not
Can I ask?
like, sorry, but
Tom, absolutely fine. No, listen, we appreciate it, and we honestly are time-wise, it is running away from us here. I want to ask you, Tom, do you have in your mind what you think? I mean, again, as a journalist, what do you gauge will be the tipping point? Because everyone is describing this week as a quite decisive week for Tottenham. They've got that massive Europa League game against Hoffenheim that will pretty much, to some degree, go to concluding their fate in the Europa League. We have to, I think, take 4 points out of the next 2 to assure automatic qualification. You then got the Leicester game at home, which, I mean, that, as I said, it looks getting tougher and tougher, really. And that sounds bad saying that. But, although Leicester are on terrible form themselves at the moment, and it's quite ironic that I think Leicester fans are now demanding that Ruud van Nistelrooy leaves the football club. We're not the only fan base that demands managers get out after a season and a bit or whatever. I mean, Leicester are demanding two in the space of 6 months, so we don't look that bad, do we, as a fan base?
I don't think Spurs fans are any that different to other teams.
What do you think, though, Tom, in terms of this decisive week? Can I ask you about a tipping point there? What do you think will be the tipping point? They've got those big games to come in the cup. Well, why don't you get to those cup games if this week doesn't go well? What's your gut feeling on it, maybe?
Well, I think I sort of said earlier that I got the sense, speaking to people, that just like say agents rather than anyone specifically connected to the club, but just a feel for it, that they would get to the Liverpool game at least and be given a chance really to sort of see how far he can go with the cups. But there's also part of me that thinks you lose at home to Leicester, given the run they've been on, given the fact that run that Spurs have been on, and given that Leicester have lost their last 7, is it now, in the league in a row, or 6 in a row, something like that.
Yep.
And then it will be tough, but I think I'm confident that they will create chances and score goals against a Leicester team that have been so porous. And yes, Spurs have struggled at the back as well, but I think they will outscore Leicester in that game, so they'll probably win that match, and that will give them a chance to get through to the cup competitions, which do seem to be absolutely fundamental to his safety going forward.
Yep. Tom, I'm very conscious. We said we're going to try and get you out of here by at least 10, we're 1 hour 10. Can we still 10 more minutes and get you out of here by 5:30? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, go on then. Let's do last 10. Yeah, that sounds good.
And the interrogation will be over, and you can tell all your lovely crew that I'm not as bad as what they think I might be. Send my regards to Ali, bless his heart, with a marathon. Listen, what we'll do is very quickly on this point. You mentioned Heung-Min Son earlier. I need to ask about what you make of Sonny's form. This is, how do I put this in the most politest way? There have been times during Son's time at Tottenham where he has had form that has been up and down, but it does feel, in terms of the current way in which we're seeing Son as a footballer at Tottenham, he looks so devoid of confidence. It might be down to being overplayed, but again, when you compare his minutes to Mo Salah, he's had a lot less, but he does get travelled around the world, bless him, on a lot of these different tours, even with Tottenham at times. I would love to know what you think when you're seeing Son at the moment, Tom, because there is a narrative around that. There may have been a frustration there that although his contract extension was triggered, he may have liked the longer-term deal, but reportedly those talks never took place. I mean, what do you think when you're watching Heung-Min Son at the moment? Because it's not the Sonny that we know what he's capable of in terms of goals. And I will back up what you said there. I mean, I'll have to be honest with you. I mean, when there's a certain video being filmed and you don't see the full context of it, I'm very loath to say it's about one person or about something that you don't get a full context to unless you're there. No one, I don't think, can condone any bad language being labelled at Sonny, who's given 9-10 years to the football club. If there's anyone that deserves to win a trophy here, it's Sonny. He's never looked for a move away. He's never agitated for a move. He's always, really been a true Spurs favourite for many fans out there. So what do you think when you're watching Sonny at the moment? Because it's not the Sonny, as I said, we know and love.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Bereft of confidence, particularly in front of goal. I mean, that was proven. It's been proven in a lot of games, hasn't it? But particularly in that Everton game, where at 1-0 in that pretty dire first half, sort of overlooked it really. But what a chance it was when Decky plays a nice ball back to him, and you just no conviction. That word that Ange loves to use about conviction in the final third. His shot didn't have any conviction from it. And you can say what you like about Son maybe not being as quick as he was, and I probably think he isn't, and that was a big part of his game. But that was nothing to do with that. It was about his finishing ability, which has been lethal during his time at Spurs. But that suggests to me someone who's overthinking things. And there have been games this season where, you know, his touch has been way off it, and his ability to make a simple pass for any Premier League player, let alone one of the greats. And he is a great. 125 Premier League games, goals rather. It's, you know, backs that up. Is quite surprising. And I know he's got an absolute army of fans, and so whenever anyone sort of publicly criticizes him, particularly journalists, it never goes down particularly well. But it comes from a place of knowing what a brilliant player he definitely was, and hopefully still is. But I can't recall really any performances this season that have completely blown me away. The only two that were very, very good were against very average opposition. Southampton away, who were absolutely doomed and were dreadful that day, and West Ham at home, who you know, obviously two managers who got sacked because their teams weren't playing well enough. So when Ange talked, and it wasn't like he came out and said in the press conference ahead of the Everton game, yeah, my senior players, you know, he declared that they had to step up and you know, start playing better. It was a response to a question where he, in his typical way, sort of considered and measured way, said, yeah, essentially, I think the words were something like, in my experience during these difficult times, it is the experienced players where you start to rely on them more, and that's kind of what we need a bit more of. And I don't think Son, as much as he's trying, it's not a lack of effort, and I'd say that's pretty much the case for most of the players this season, which is another reason why it doesn't feel like the players have turned on Ange. I definitely don't think that. It's not through a lack of effort with Son, which you never expect it not to be a lack of effort with Son because of the character he is. It's just not. Things aren't going well enough for him at the moment, and I can't help sometimes thinking about. I asked Ange back in start of December, you might remember, about Sonny's form because he wasn't playing very well or scoring many goals, and Ange came back saying he made the Mo Salah comparison and basically said. Essentially, the point was everyone wrote off Salah last season, saying he was sort of on a dip, and look at him now. And he said, but he also said, in his experience in football, the end often comes very quickly for any player, but top players, and it's a very quick drop off, and it's you know, it's sad to see, but I don't see that with Sonny. Very much feel he can reclaim it. I'm not saying that I don't agree. But I'm yet to see evidence of him getting back to that form. And with every passing sort of difficult match for him, where he doesn't impose himself anywhere like he used to, I start thinking maybe there's something in that. I don't know. I mean, he is 32, he's turning 33, absolute club legend, been brilliant, probably still score goals wherever he's at, and his numbers aren't awful by any stretch. But it's the lack of devastating performances that we've known and enjoyed for so many years that is quite concerning. And finally, with him, not to hammer him too much, maybe it will come across that way, but you know, he's obviously the captain. I've seen people talking about whether that's the right thing or not, and the only thing is I'll defer to an interview I did with Gus Poyet a little while ago, and he's a big fan of Son, for the player that he is, but he himself was sort of questioning whether Son was the right kind of character for that particular role, whether it would help him more if he didn't have to worry about that as much. Although he was also saying maybe what we view or what Gus views as a captain kind of is more looking back to the Roy Keanes or the Dennis Wise where he had at Chelsea, or Tim Sherwood era, and there just aren't as many of those kind of characters anymore, so the football has changed. So perhaps even when he was talking about it, he was kind of not quite sure if it was exactly what he meant or not. But I do think there's a debate to be had over whether it would help or hinder whether he has the captaincy or not, and that isn't sort of a massive dig on him. It just feels like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders at the moment, as proven after that Everton game. And I think everyone wants him to find a way of getting back to the Sonny that everyone has enjoyed for so long.
Yeah, Tom, it's an interesting one. Just quickly on that particular point because I'm going to have to conflate about 4 or 5 different questions here in one of the interest of time. But on the Sonny thing, Because I worried, I'm terrified a little bit that having given him the armband and then seeing the lack of confidence that he now struggles from, if you then took it away, would that compound on the problem and become, like a double-edged sword? You want to take it away so he can focus on himself and get back to it, but then ultimately, in so doing, you're going to rip away a little bit that last remaining confidence that he has, and it becomes, like I say, a double dip, and it could spiral out of control and put to bed any chance of seeing him return to his former self, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Just hearing you phrase that question like that, it makes me think maybe I've sort of kind of over spoke on how I feel about. I'm not calling for Tottenham to do that.
Of course not.
I'm more sort of I'm just maybe that's the way it's kind of come across. It's more like wondering what's up with Sonny, what's going on, and whether like the added responsibility and pressure of being captain during a really difficult period when he's struggling with his own form is contributing to that difficult period. But I don't think that would happen. Ange loves Son to bits. He's been, he said that from day one. So I agree. I think that would be it would be kicking a man when he's down, to be honest, if that were to be the case. It's more just you wonder if the responsibility is weighing heavily, but maybe that would for any captain right now.
Yeah, 100%. It's not easy. And look, obviously, it's also not easy if your place is under threat, which I guess is where we're going to pivot to now with regards to transfers. Now, we obviously know that there's not a huge amount in the noise, in the zeitgeist. And so on that basis, I'm going to sort of squash three questions together, throw some names out there, both defence, middle and attack in the interests of time. Lots of names have been sort of percolated around in the various journals and from the various journalists like yourself, Tom. In terms of defenders, we've been hearing links to players like Skriniar, Christensen, Koit Akora over at Mönchengladbach, Patrick Dorgu, who I think apparently has been linked to Manchester United tonight. United also going after players like Osimhen, who ridiculously Tottenham have been linked with at the top end of the pitch, alongside players like Marcus Rashford, Gyökeres and Buemo, Ferguson, Jonathan David. And in the midfield, we've been linked with players like Richard Rios over in Palmeiras, Stafford Fratesi, Johnny Cardoso, Douglas Luiz. I'm not sure, Ricky, if he can catch up with the amount of names I'm throwing out with his pictures on the screen, but Douglas Luiz.
Doing well.
It's going to blow up. It's going to blow up. We're not even signed anyone. It's going to blow up.
It's going to melt the entire StreamYard down.
We've not even signed anyone.
No, we haven't signed anyone, but the links are always there. But, Tom, how strong, all those names I throw out there, I'm sure there's others as well. Are there any, can we hang our hat on any of these names? Is there any chance from what you know, that any of those things are even remotely close to being serious opportunities?
Wow.
What some answers. What a waste of
yeah, it's a
I can go through them again if you want. I can name them again if you need.
No. Let's, rather than going through individually, I would say I think at this point a midfielder is less likely. Okay. I think when you look at that's probably an area of the park they've generally been more well stocked in. I mean, in fact, James Maddison can't get a game at the moment, or can't get a regular game at the moment. Sort of sums up they've got quite a lot in that area. Although I suppose Basuma's now got injured, although he's supposed to be back for the weekend. At the start of the window, put it this way, when I was sort of speaking to agents, like other people do, it felt like centre back and an attacker and a goalkeeper, which they obviously brought in, and a midfielder I'd heard, but that seems to have kind of lessened of late, were the sort of main areas. Left back, interestingly, less so, even after Udogie got injured, which I still think I thought was a mistake in the summer. And if that continues to be the case, remains a worry. And actually, on that note, what is he going to do against Hoffenheim, seeing as Reguilon and Spence can't play? But that's another question to be had at another time.
On a different spot for Tom's sake.
Yeah. They were in for Kolo Muani. They didn't get him. So that sort of confirms what we kind of thought anyway, that they were after a forward. Ange has been on the record. We pushed him on this about wanting another forward. He specifically said it wasn't necessarily a centre forward. It could be almost like someone who's quite versatile. Muani sort of fit that profile. They will be looking around still between now and the end of the window to see what comes up. There is a lack of viable, at least last I sort of told, the lack of viable options, obvious options out there. I think it's probably most likely to be a loan if anything is done. So that would presumably rule out Brian and Brumo in this stage, because look, he's one of the hottest forwards out there right now. So you're talking, what is that? He's going to cost you, 50, 60 million. So I don't think
we'll also cross off Gokore at that point as well, Tom, probably.
Well, I just do you think of it logically? That feels like playing Football Manager, trying to think you're trying to sign Gyökeres because you've spent 65 million on your centre forward. Obviously, Solanke needs help, as he has talked about, specifically Richarlison coming back, maybe be part of that. But you're not going to go and blow a similar amount of money, if not more, on another striker who's expecting to play every week when you only play one up front in your ideal starting 11. So that's just not saying I'm not, that I've heard that's definitely not a go. It's just using logic. I just can't see how that would work. Anyway, so I still think they're going to be hunting around for a forward. I still think, someone like Rashford, when I was first sort of looking into that, because at first you think really, and then given how it's been going for him and the wages he's on, but I don't think it was a sort of, it's been ruled out completely. But personally, I would think that would have to be sort of knocked down on his what the contribution of wages if he were to be signed. I suppose theoretically he actually fits Ange's style when he's at his best. But if at his best, he wouldn't be available. So that's a big sort of question mark. But in terms of, the wide forward who bursts in round the backs and score goals, actually fits the system quite well. But I just think there's a lot of question marks about him. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Rashford. Maybe that'll be one right at the end of the window. But yeah, I get the sense that, I don't know, it's kind of obviously dragging on, and I don't get the sense there's, when Ange is saying that there's nothing, it doesn't seem like there's anything imminent. They're trying their best. I don't think you should expect the equivalent of an Antonin Kinski. I could be completely wrong here, because it's not like you're going for the horse's mouth. You're talking around. You're speaking to people. You're trying to get a feel for what's working, how it's going, and what the feel is. And look, this, you said it before when you talked about Fabio Paratici, spinning lots of plates, being in for lots of players. The noise getting out there. You mentioned me, but let's be honest, we're talking about Fabrizio instead when it on that front. So that's generous to me, but the point is still stands. That kind of stuff does get out there. Johan Lange doesn't work like that as much. Wilson Odegaard's transfer is sort of testament to that. Things can crop up, and you'd like to think that they were definitely going to bring someone in before the end of the window. At this stage, I don't know. I wouldn't be putting my mortgage on it, but look, there's still days to go. And one thing I would say is the business widespread hasn't been massive, as it often is in January. It often ramps up towards the end. And just when asking around about various things, there's a lot of talking at a lot of clubs around a lot of players and not a lot of action so far. So I suppose Spurs fans will have to hope that is the case, and then suddenly for everyone, and then suddenly something starts kicking into action. We'll have to wait to see what happens.
Tom, we've got 7,000 that are watching the show live. Before we let you go, we remind people where they can find you, and you have a queue as to why are we not making these signings. If I had to ask you to guesstimate, Tom, at this stage, and just to be clear, Tom, when you next come on here in the summer, no one will ever remember we've had this conversation because it'll be far, far down the line. No one will ever remember. Give me a number. What do you think they'll do between now and the end of the window? And don't be scared to give me a negative number because it's Tottenham, so you can never be scared. Don't worry about it.
-1. That would be literally a negative number.
I was surprised we lose a couple of players after the show. That's been the story of the season.
Reguilon moves on. I don't know, but 1. I'll go 1. I don't think it's going to be loads. I know that's not what you want to hear. Let's see what happens. Look, maybe things change, and every day during this window you speak to people and things change. Like, you think of youngsters who Ange has publicly talked about maybe moving out on loan, and then I guess we'll actually be a prime example. I think the club, as Ange's last but one presser pointed out, the plan is to loan him out. Then Dominic Solanke gets injured. They're not going to bring another forward. If it doesn't happen,
no. Yeah.
Can you afford to let him go? Dane Scarlett's coming back he's coming back from his loan, but the plan for that was, the reasoning behind that was a lack of minutes at Oxford. The plan is still to loan him out again. So, numbers wise, they're down. But we'll see. Hopefully more than zero. Hopefully more than one.
Fingers
For everyone's sake.
No,
and I want to write about transfers. I want to write about players coming in and a boost for Postecoglou. It doesn't.
I know. Tom, you can only share what you can tell us. Don't feel you need to owe us anything more than what you're telling us. The reality is, you can't go on the pitch and score for us, can you? Can you? I mean, I do know you can play a little bit, but
who said that? Okay, I'm not sure who said that, but I can confirm in the media game last year, I have yet to score a goal. I've missed several big chances. Ali Goff,
right? Okay. On that basis, we'll keep you on the bench.
You'd be better off with no one up front than me.
Better than Richarlison. Let's be honest, Tom. You're in.
I bet you're more than
the weekend. We might have a better game ratio. I'm not sure about that, mate. I'm definitely a veteran at this stage of my career. That way.
Listen, for Tom's own sake, we've got to let him go. I want to say, make sure that you guys go subscribe to the wonderful Shawnee over at the Spurs Talk Show, doing loads of stuff during the window. Although this show is not an advertisement at the moment during the transfer window, but Shawnee, go and check out loads of stuff Sean's doing. Look, there's over nearly 8,000 of you watching the show live. Please go over and subscribe to Tom Barclay's wonderful channel, where Tom brings you reaction to all those press conferences that we need, obviously, to understand where we are on Tottenham. There's injury news on there. There's all breaking news. Tom, am I missing anything in there? Those what you cover on these wonderful
very kind
videos?
Mainly reactions to press conferences and matches, so you can get my sort of take on them. I suppose there's a lot of match reaction. I guess there's a lot of. I mean, you guys do a fantastic job doing all that kind of stuff. But I suppose Ali's our main YouTube journalist, I suppose, on the patch, and he's brilliant at what he does. But I suppose mine is a little bit different, being a sort of quick hit, I suppose, after a press conference to see what I thought about it. And I endeavour to do it after everyone that I go to. So check it out.
Listen, Tom, you saw the way our season's going. We need a quick hit to get out of here. Listen, I want to say a massive thank you to the wonderful Shawnee at the Spurs Talk Show, the brilliant Tom Barclay. We'll hopefully see Tom over the summer. Look, we have been the last word on Spurs. I'll leave you with some news that is kind of breaking around the Spurs hemisphere, that there's a potential from some reports that Dominic Solanke may be back for the second leg against Liverpool. So let's try and leave you with some positive news on what's been a tricky last 48 hours in the Spurs fan base. More therapy coming your way soon from the wonderful Sean at the Spurs Talk Show, from the brilliant Tom Barclay from The Sun. We have been the last word on Spurs. Please keep safe, keep well, and as always, come on you Spurs.